Did you know that the creatures living on the behemoth were originally parasites that literally ate their way into its body? These smaller creatures are known as nestlings. At first glance, they may look like they simply live on top of the behemoth, but their relationship is much more disturbing than that, because the nestlings were never supposed to be there. The behemoth itself evolved to survive enormous amounts of damage while dealing even more in return. It is the largest war unit in the swarm. Its body is protected by a massive shell, while its claws are powerful enough to crush the bones of most creatures it encounters. But despite its size and strength, the behemoth is surprisingly careful when attacking prey. Rather than completely destroying the body, it often leaves the spinal cord intact. This is important because the hive can later recover genetic material from the remains and use that DNA to evolve new creatures and adaptations. So even one of the most destructive organisms in the swarm still hunts with a specific purpose. But all of that armor comes with a serious disadvantage. The behemoth is incredibly slow. Its enormous body requires a huge amount of energy just to move, and the thick shell protecting it makes chasing faster creatures almost impossible. And this is where the nestlings become useful. Nestlings are small winged organisms capable of leaving the behemoth and attacking targets that their host could never reach. They fly toward distant enemies, attack them with acid, and then return to the safety of the behemoth's shell. This gives the behemoth something it would otherwise completely lack: range. The behemoth protects the nestlings from larger predators, while the nestlings compensate for the behemoth's lack of speed. It seems like an almost perfectly designed partnership, but it did not start that way. Originally, the nestlings were parasites. Instead of helping the behemoth, they used it purely as a source of food. A nestling would find one of the small openings in the behemoth's shell and begin burrowing deeper into the body. It would slowly eat its way through the tissue beneath the armor until it reached the bloodstream. Once connected, it could feed directly from its host. The behemoth was essentially being eaten from the inside by the creatures living on its back. Normally, a parasitic relationship like this would be harmful to the host. Too many nestlings could steal nutrients, damage tissue, or weaken the behemoth over time. But instead of eliminating the parasites, something very different happened. Over generations, the relationship began to change. The nestlings became increasingly useful to the behemoth. Their ability to fly allowed them to attack enemies from a distance, warn of approaching threats, and gather food that their slow-moving host could never catch by itself. At the same time, the behemoth provided the nestlings with something equally valuable: protection. A tiny flying creature is extremely vulnerable on its own, but when that creature spends most of its life attached to one of the largest and most heavily armored organisms in the hive, very few predators are going to risk approaching it. What began as parasitism slowly developed into symbiosis. Eventually, both organisms became dependent on one another, and this can be seen in the way the nestlings behave when their host is killed. You might expect them to immediately fly away. After all, the behemoth can no longer protect them. There is no reason to remain attached to a dead creature, but the nestlings do not leave. Instead, they stay with the body. The same tunnels they originally created to reach the behemoth's bloodstream now give them access to its remaining tissue. They continue feeding from their dead host for as long as they possibly can. As the body begins to run out of nutrients, the nestlings slowly consume what remains, and eventually there is no longer enough food to keep them alive. But even then, they still do not abandon the behemoth. Without their host, they appear unable or perhaps unwilling to survive on their own. One by one, the remaining nestlings die beside the creature they spent their entire lives attached to, which makes their relationship especially strange. The nestlings began as invaders. They burrowed through the behemoth's shell, consumed its tissue, and attached themselves directly to its bloodstream. But over time, the parasite became a partner. The host became dependent on the parasite. So, when you see a behemoth walking across the battlefield, you are not really looking at a single creature. You are looking at multiple organisms that evolved around one another, each covering the weaknesses of the other. One provides armor, strength, and protection. The others provide speed, range, and access to prey, and buried underneath that cooperation is the remains of a parasitic relationship where one organism literally ate its way into the body of another. The behemoth may be one of the largest creatures in the hive, but some of the most disturbing things about it are the smallest creatures living inside.